I think all these countries are stereotyped by media, and so from the outside you don't see the actual country. You see the media narrative about the country. Most recent imagery is of the sort of street activity around Imran Khan, and so the net impression is, it's all unsettled again. We've all been exposed to Pakistan's engineering around the world. There's lots of Pakistani engineers in Finland. What has to happen is the sector has to get together and make the case and make the policies will be stable, and that anyone who invests will not be disrupted by a change in government policy. They're specialist conferences. I've never seen Pakistan present at these conferences. If Pakistan puts together a proposition and the right ministries go out, and there's some shoe leather you have to use here. You have to be able to see who are we dealing with.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to another episode of How Does It Work, a podcast by Pakistani. We have Adil with us, co-hosting the podcast today, and we have a very special guest, Mark Linder. He's an industrial marketer. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Shan, it's great to be here.
Okay, so before I ask you what an industrial marketer is, could you tell us what you're doing in Pakistan?
I'm here as a guest of the Nutshell Group to give a talk at a conference, the Leaders in Islamabad conference that happened the last 2 days.
All right. And is this your first time here? Or?
First time. We have talked about visiting many times, and
we even came close a few times.
It came very close, and indeed the same thing with Asfar Hassan, who organizes the conference. This is the third time we've tried to make it work. And twice now I've booked tickets to Pakistan and had to cancel them because of various conflicts.
Yeah.
But we're here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here, yeah. But in the current, political and sort of economic landscape of Pakistan and the issues that are here, from the outside looking in, is it still an attractive place to do business? Is it still are there people like yourself who see Pakistan with some degree of hope? Or
I think all these countries are stereotyped by media, and so from the outside you don't see the actual country. You see the media narrative about the country, which is still might be caught up in very old issues and or sensational events, and so the imagery now most recent imagery is of the sort of street activity around Imran Khan, and so the net impression is, it's all unsettled again. And it's only when you get into on the ground that you begin to have some interaction. You see it's not at all like that. Much more interesting. And so, yes, from the outside, you have no idea at all about the institutional credibility of Pakistan. When you have a little glimpse on the inside, you see the strength of the patriotism and the commitment to the republic, and you see the frustration, but you also see the ambition and the urgent need to regain confidence. And so the vibrancy is much more apparent on the inside.
What impressions have you formed? I mean, I know you haven't been here long, but let's say, for example, on the drive in, what kind of impressions did you form about the way the country looks, just on a cosmetic level?
Well, it's so deceptive because it's such an exquisite experience, and I can't say, I have an overall impression of the country, but landing at the airport and the ride in, it doesn't seem at all like Pakistan, and in the sense of the narrative, and the ride around the neighborhood. We're in a sort of posh sector at the Serena Hotel, which is a posh place itself, and this does not conform to any of the stereotypes, and I realize it's not representative necessarily of Pakistan as a whole, but it's a very intriguing way to get an initial experience with the country. No question. It's exquisite.
And so you're here for the conference, and in that conference, a lot of the kind of innovators of Islamabad were there. Did that give you some sense of what outside interventions, economic interventions and innovations in Pakistan somebody like yourself could bring with your experience?
Well, I think one thing that struck me is it's the nature of these conferences to suspect that it's all about adopting technologies and processes from the outside. That what are you doing out there that we should then do? But actually what I was struck by was the sophistication of what's going on inside. So there was nothing that any speaker talked about that wasn't actually echoed and amplified by the Pakistani leadership who was also there. So you can talk about microfinance. You can talk about even something like blockchain, and actually you get a thorough understanding of that from the inside. Mm-hmm. It's not as though the Pakistan's sitting here receiving wisdom from other economies. I felt it was a peer exchange, right. and I've also felt a desire to not just copy what's going on outside, but to actually transcreate it, find a way to create an organic, Pakistan version of what's there, and so that drive is I'd say a true learning drive. It's not a replication drive. It's an actual learning drive. Mm-hmm. And that was absolutely palpable. It was very clear.
That's actually really like heartwarming to hear. Yeah, from someone. Yeah.
But we know that, don't we? I mean, we know intuitively that Pakistan has a huge amount of potential, that the people are here. It just seems that sometimes we need to be reminded by people like yourself that we do have that. How do we put it into practice, though? How do we put what we know into practice?
Think, well, I live in Finland, and Finland is subject to stereotypes also. My network in the U.S. thinks Finland is all socialist, and there's no capitalism there, and we can't afford cars, and we have to take buses everywhere, and some kind of draconian, extension of the old Soviet Union. In fact, they still think of it as, aren't you guys still kind of communist? Never mind that Finland has the highest per capita unicorns of any country, etc. All that stuff. So this stereotype is there, and the only way around the stereotype is to visit. Yeah. There's no, if I had anything, I say this in Finland. I've proposed this many times to have organized an inbound program, because you have to take people who are coming in for some other reason, hijack them for a couple of days, migrate them into different experiences, send them back with an infusion of energy. Then they go back and they're at the board level. A lot of your visiting business people are at the board level or in the C-suite, so to speak, right? And then they go back and say, "Look, this is a different case. Yeah. We need to look at this again." Mm-hmm. The only way to do that is to have direct experience, cross-cultural. Yeah. So imagine if somebody's coming in here to tie up some deal in steel or whatever, but for 2 days they went into academia. They saw, and including some of the struggles, but took academia, healthcare, etc. And then you go back, and government, and you go back and you then can talk about something.
And you have a much more real picture of what the on-ground reality is.
Much more real.
Yeah. So now let's go to what is an industrial marketer and what is exactly that you do?
Well, if you think of marketing as trying to link the interests of an audience that has a need with an entity that has a solution for that need. That's what marketing is all about, right? And so we're familiar with the consumer side, highly sophisticated, and we see the advertising and the channels that are there. Industrially, marketing exists, but it's more informal, and the procedures are not as rigorous, And to go back to Finland, Finland's a country of engineers, and engineers have a build it and they will come mentality, quite natural. We've got a great thing. How come nobody wants it? And you need the marketing process to create the storytelling and the linkage and build the channels to create decisions that then become purchases, right? So what I focus on are technologies that are sometimes low-tech technologies or processes that are new to the market but need some kind of something to capture the imagination of the target audience. So I'm working, for example, with lighter-than-air airships that are brand new design, not a cigar-shaped dirigible, but lenticular, different load structure, etc.
Sorry, so just to stop you. dirigibles. You're talking about helium balloons.
Helium balloons, but not they don't look quite the same way you think they look, because this design is more spaceship.
So it's not the Hindenburg anymore.
Yes, well, that's, of course, this is that's a very good example, because if you say airship, people think Hindenburg. And they have natural thoughts about it. So you've got to take understand the natural thoughts and deconstruct it and build a different case. And so you're trying to develop applications for the military, for construction, for tourism. The hot air balloon is the dominant lighter than air structure in the world. Very successful, except for the fact that it's not controlled, right?
Yeah.
And
doesn't have a great PR.
It doesn't have great PR, but it has a great safety record, actually. The helicopter has a huge footprint. It's enormously wasteful. We think of the helicopter as an axiom. The helicopter is the way you lift stuff and hover and everything else. You don't realize the physics of a helicopter, that sort of 80% of the thing is just trying to keep itself fighting the air to fight gravity, carrying all this fuel, burning 8 liters of fuel a minute, this kind of thing. And if you have a lighter than air structure, suddenly gravity is your friend, and you have a completely different concept. So it's a different paradigm, but it's got to be regulated like an aircraft. It's got to be approved. You've got to have the right training, support. So that's the kind of stuff I get involved with, and it's the same thing in the construction space.
And we'll get to the construction space. That's also interesting. But what are the sort of opportunities or areas that you see in Pakistan specifically that you feel like, okay, this is where your services or your experience could be useful?
Well, I don't know that I'm useful to anybody, but in that sense. But yes, you're in a world where, thanks to digital technologies, things are being dematerialized, and you can start something without structure that you would have needed even 5 or 10 years ago, right? So we talk about microfinance, for example. All that's a good example of infrastructure that exists without any physical aspect. Same thing's true in manufacturing. I mean, it's the ability to set up advanced fabrication is much more decentralized now than it was even 10 years ago. And so the possibility of doing sophisticated assembly in any place is more available, put it that way. And so in some of these new areas, you have, we talk about deglobalization, which I believe is happening, but I don't believe in deglobalization. But in a globalizing world, you can locate manufacturing capability in different parts of the world and link it together in a supply chain. So part of this is to figure out where can you have maybe demand in one part of the world, but the supply piece of it is created here in Pakistan, where you might have certain advantages in terms of...
We have the advantages perhaps, but do we have the ability to, how do you get past some of the protocols that are necessary here? Do we have the systems in place, or are we systemized enough to be able to do some of those things that make us the next big thing?
I can't answer that, but I can say, because I don't have direct experience, but I can say what makes it possible is an attitude on the part of investors of confidence, the ability to sort of look at effectively the whites of the eyes and say, I trust this administration, and I trust that there'll be a legal system, that conflicts can be resolved, that intellectual property is safe, that I can recruit the right skills, et cetera, Yeah. But in the age of automation, you might think, for example, Pakistan has an advantage in low labor costs, but in an age of automation, labor becomes not an inconsequential piece of the cost component, but it's not as big a factor, right? What matters is the ability to put together the process and manufacture. So, for example, in Finland, we have a firm, it's family-owned, a fantastically successful firm that manufactures, if you will, connectors and components of building structures. So if you're connecting a beam to a post, there's a fastener, if you will, that puts that together. If you're doing certain kinds of concrete, you have certain cages that are custom made for that system, right? You have if you're doing beams and you want to lighten the weight, there are certain designs that actually can form the steel in different ways that have superior strength but are lighter. And Payco is the firm that does this. Well, they have 12 manufacturing facilities around the world, so they have decentralized their production to make it local, right? They've decentralized design to make it local. They have a culture and an operating framework that they've put into different countries, including Saudi, including in Southeast Asia, right? And the local skill level is not a barrier. You know, you want to have consistency and predictability in the local infrastructure. You want to have a local market, but there's no reason it can't be, you know, in Pakistan.
And you talk about Finland, and obviously there's, to our mind, certainly from here, from our perspective, it's a European country, albeit in America it's seen as this old kind of Soviet bloc dystopia. But Finland is a developed nation. Countries like Pakistan, even countries like you've worked recently, for example, in Saudi Arabia, and I'd love to hear more about the NEOM project that you worked on. But does it depend on the type of country and the history of that country that makes things more
we had a question about that yesterday after I gave my presentation, effectively. Finland, if you take Finland as an example, Finland as an independent country is only 106 years old. It won its independence from Lenin, actually. And it formed its nation state by dint of a set of commitments not unlike Pakistan. I mean, there was a commitment to the language, which had been emasculated, a commitment to certain social structures, etc. They're Lutherans. That was just a fact of life. But they committed to Lutheranism, you know, and the nation made itself. It had created its own metaphors. It created its own graphic narrative. A series of artists and poets created the myth of Finland and made it part of the nation. Yeah. It's only 100 years old, and it was an agricultural nation. There's no resource up there except spruce and pine and birch. That's it. No natural product. They invented a paper and pulp industry and the machinery to make the paper and pulp, etc. And then they had no natural advantage for electronics. They had a business that made rubber tires and other kinds of things, importing the raw materials. That branched into retailing and distributing electronics, then started assembling. That's Nokia. Nokia is the name of a village.
Right.
It's a tiny village in Finland. And
Nokia is what took you to Finland, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, but when they were in the handset business. Yes,
Right.
yes. Yeah. And so out of what you might say is a nascent business with a wide portfolio, because they were sort of suppliers of all kinds of services. They decided it was deliberate, but it was a small thing. They participated in the Nordic standard for mobile telephony in the early stage, and they realized this had tremendous potential, and they closed down the rest of the business and focused on that. And then they uniquely said, well, why can't the whole world carry a mobile phone, which was a heretical thought at the time, when phones were these big, heavy things, right? Yeah. And so this, I'm only saying this to say there's nothing about that story that can't happen here. Not a single thing. And their approach in different markets was to meet the market where it is, to not be judgmental, not get into discussions about which form is better, but to simply approach the market and say, let's figure out how we work together, which is one reason why Nokia was very strong in Muslim countries, because it wasn't seen as a sort of Christian brand, so to speak, right? And same thing in Asia. You have to meet the market where it is. But all of this is available, if you will, when you you look at the kind of acumen that I was seeing yesterday, which is just one glimpse of what's in Pakistan. I mean, we've all been exposed to Pakistan's engineering around the world. There's lots of Pakistani engineers in Finland. Nokia still, we think of Nokia as gone because the handset business is gone. It's bigger than ever because there's only 3 providers of networks now. It's Nokia in Finland, Ericsson in Sweden, and Huawei. And the world is deciding a lot of the world is deciding they don't want to do business with Huawei. Yeah. And Nokia is a huge entity. And Pakistan is very well represented there, and the Pakistanis who come to Finland love it. Yeah. But they also tell great stories about home. So all of this is available now. You have a lot of these connections, and so it's a long way of saying you look here and you say, okay, young nation, this is all still possible. Lots of turbulence. Finland was attacked in World War II by the Soviet Union. Same playbook, you might say, as Ukraine. Same playbook without Finland having the resources to back it up. It's Finland by itself. The Germans actually helped Finland a little bit, the Nazis.
Right.
But they were eventually on their own, and they had to do a deal. And they traded 10% of the land for an agreement, and then had to gradually sort of inch themselves away from the Soviet Union without being too provocative. And so Finland's not quite in the same place that Ukraine is, but it's not a dissimilar story.
Yeah.
So you go through all that. Finland has civil war after separation from Russia.
Okay.
So it's like...
So basically what you're saying is that it's the same thing. I mean, any country has that potential, despite all the hardships that they might face, and Pakistan is one of those countries that faces those hardships.
And in a way, you have to go through the hardships to get to that.
Yeah.
Then you appreciate what you've got. If Finland didn't have the Civil War, you wouldn't have that sense of identity, right?
Yeah.
If Finland didn't have that separation from Russia, you wouldn't have that strength of languages. Why is the Finnish teaching system so well respected around the world, do you think?
I don't know. It just seems to gear out. I mean, we've all heard it's really good, but we have no real idea why.
One reason why is because it was committed to the language, and the language needed resuscitation. And so the teacher became an important factor. And then the second part of it was, young nation, you can't afford to have the nanny state. You have to have people who have agency. So the idea was, let's organize this education so the kid comes out as an effective taxpayer, so to speak, right? So it's all organized that way. It was also the same day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Finland passed a law outlawing private schools. That would be a big, big step for Pakistan, maybe undoable, right?
Yeah.
But the idea was very simple. If we have private education, we're going to have a disparity.
Yeah.
And we want everybody to be productive, And so the commitment to education came out of a very practical...
What's the population of Finland?
About 5.5 million.
Right. Okay.
And it's like all these European populations slowly aging, and it has all of that kind of characteristic.
Okay.
Talk to me about construction. You mentioned that you work in the sort of construction space. What do you do exactly in it?
I've been involved with some of the data trust services in construction, which is another subject. Finland has it's a unique culture which values trust at a very high level, and so if you can believe this, in the construction space, there's anxiety if firms are not all on a completely level playing field. Meaning, if we're going to do business together, that I want to be sure you've paid your taxes, and you want to be sure I've paid my taxes and are completely above board. Because if somebody hasn't paid taxes, then they have a bit of an advantage. And so the Finnish culture, partly I think because of the latent conflict with Russia, it needs to have high social cohesion.
Right.
And so this manifests itself in many ways. And so the Finnish industry developed a method for validating all the players in the industry to create this level playing field. It's absolutely unique in the world. There's certain things that come out of that culture that are unique in the world. And so I've been involved in exporting that. marketing that internally and exporting it.
Exporting the
the ability
of,
to do that,
right.
Provide
what,
those services.
What sort of countries have you been exporting it to?
Well, the Nordics have bought into it, and we have a pilot in Neom actually for this kind of thing, and more to come that I can't really talk about. But so that was an entry to it, plus other things. But along the way, yes. We got into the productivity issues of construction. You know, you go to any country in the world and you ask them what is the industry that has the poorest track record for quality, cost, reliability, and the answer is always going to be the construction sector. Any country.
But you've spoken previously about there's a method to forego that problem.
Well, this has been what happens is there's a lot of digital tools that are being developed that your audience would know about, information modeling tools and digital, effectively replicas of the design and digital productivity techniques. But the overall process of construction is not really any different from what it was when the pyramids were built.
Right.
A variety of competing entities that don't trust each other are contracted to come together and in a irregular process to deliver materials that are assembled on site, bespoke, for that building, right? It's been that way.
What's wrong with that?
It's a heritage, and
Right.
and what's wrong with that is nothing's wrong with it because it has enormous feedback loops that keep it that way. But you step back, and it's massively inefficient, right? In most cultures, construction is like 10% or so of the economy, and it's 40% of all the global emissions. It's hugely wasteful. It's not just the concrete that goes into the building;
Right.
it's the concrete that's wasted before it goes into the building. It's the material that's thrown away that's actually not used. So construction waste. Only half of construction waste is the part of dismantling a building. There's a huge amount of waste in building a building because it's over-delivered and undersupplied. And every picture you ever see of a construction site, you see people standing around. And they are actually standing around because probably 20 to 30% of the work on site is waiting for other material to arrive so that people can actually work. It's
or for other
astonishing.
parts of the building to be constructed so
It's
that they can
huge.
Yeah,
20% of all worker time when you see these studies is spent in looking for the tools that should be there that aren't there. I mean, it's a gigantic thing. So to tell a brief story, because Finland was involved in this, it started with the American assembly line. Henry Ford invented the assembly line.
Right.
The Germans in the aircraft industry, a firm called Junkers, very famous, right? Henrik Junkers basically copied the assembly line and started making airplanes and fighters that way. It was good. The war comes along, World War II. Of course, the Germans had to make a lot more planes. He sped up the assembly line, et cetera, but it was not more efficient. You had just lots of sort of shortages and too much material and wastage of different kinds. And he had this idea to synchronize the entire supply chain, and he called it Takt. Takt is a German word that means the sort of beat, measure, like in a piece of music, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's Takt. So
T-A-K-T.
T-A-K-T, Takt.
Yes.
So it's a beat in time. And his idea was like an orchestra to get all the players to follow the same beat, Takt, right? So he would define that beat around how often you had to actually output a final product, a plane. So in the case of his fighters, he needed a new fighter every 4 hours. So he got the entire supply chain to make its output on a 4-hour cycle. So everybody's moving in this kind of coordinated way.
Wow.
And it took some planning, quite detailed planning. But once it got started, it was a miracle because the trust was established. You know, you and I were on the same beat, so we would be exact with each other. You didn't have to store a lot of inventory because I was going to ask for something that you didn't expect.
You knew exactly where
we knew where we are, and we just moved along, right? Okay. So after the war, and by the way, they used this for making tanks. It got spread all over, right, for these kinds of production. So after the war, the Japanese resurfaced. Now, bear in mind, Germany was destroyed, Japan was destroyed. Japan had this heritage of listening to the Germans for industrial techniques. Quite interesting. They would come over. So they resumed this. Sent a mission over, Mitsubishi and Toyota, and a guy named Kenichi Omai, I think Omai, was one of these first visitors. And, of course, they learned about TOCT. And he took that back to his automobiles. We now know it as the Toyota production system, famous. Lean production is an iconic thing, right?
Yeah.
And so all automotive then started to follow that, right? And so TOCT, which is the underlying synchronicity, right, becomes this phenomenon for vast production. In 1992, a Finnish guy, academic, Lauri Koskela, working out of Stanford University, says, why can't we apply this construction? It's the most screwed up industry. Let's get industrial about construction. He writes a paper, fantastic paper. It gets a kind of, its reaction is it's a well-written paper, but it's ignored because it's like, what? This industry? You know, where we're still doing things like the pyramids like that? Never happened. So it took 20 years. In only 4 years ago, the largest Finnish construction company partnered with some German guys who developed the software. They put a 5-person team on to say, why don't we try this? And within a year, they were building, they started with basic structures, parking garages, stuff like that. And the results were exactly the same as when Junkers converted to TOCT during the war. This
in terms of the
productivity,
in terms of the waste.
Waste goes down. This is almost the same.
And profits.
Yeah, when you hear the numbers, you can't believe it. So then when somebody says to you, "Yeah, we're building buildings at 40% less cost and time,"
Wow.
You're like, "No, this can't be real." But it is real because they're just eliminating the waste.
Yeah.
40%, and that's the same across the industries as well.
Well, what happens is, yes, because inventory, you know, the idea of just in time is a fanciful idea. It means you have to maintain vast amounts of inventory so that I can order when I want to and you'll deliver it, right? All of this is a waste of time, of money. So this efficiency spreads, and what they found is that the TOC team, once a team goes into TOC, they're not going backwards. And they infect all the other teams. So now that same company, which might have 400 projects or so at any given time, 150 of them are now TOC projects.
These are the finished products.
And it's just spread. Like it's taking over this market share. And so now this core team is saying, and some of this is happening in the States, but not very much. And the core team is saying, how do we find an international partner for this movement? So we have these conversations going in South Africa and the Netherlands and Saudi. We have several conversations in Saudi, very interested in that. And we discussed this yesterday as Pakistan as a possibility.
Wow.
And
what are the impediments to something like TOCT being applied in the Pakistan construction industry?
Well,
are there any?
I think I'm going to just be impish and say maybe the impediment is internal preconception that it can't be done. I mean, remember in Germany, when Germany did this, you think of Germany as highly industrialized, but back then, this is like 70 years ago, that industry was dispersed in a whole series of cottage businesses. So it's not like one factory made these planes. You know, you would have a little family business that made certain parts for the wheels, all scattered all over the place. And there were no computers, obviously, nothing like that. So it's not dissimilar from a construction industry here, where you have a fragmented supply chain. So you might say the reaction is, oh, yeah, well, this is Germanic cultures. They're inherently organized. You know, you Lutherans up there, and, you know, you know how to work together. I don't believe that was
There's nothing further from Lutheran than the Japanese Toyota vote.
Exactly. Yeah. It does depend on the convening power and the leadership of how it gets organized, right? So it wouldn't work here with some random construction company that, you know, you got to have a leading company who really feels this and has the kind of charisma to attract a team, and then you got to get trained in it. But then it's going to be created your own way. It's not going to be. It's not going to be a mirror
You
image.
have to localize it.
It's got to be absolutely localized.
So you talk about yourself. You're a marketer. You talked about what marketing is. So presumably somebody like you would be the ideal person to talk to the right people in this industry, in the construction industry in Pakistan, to proselytize.
Well, in this case, that's why I came down to do this, because in this case, you have a team in Finland who is much more knowledgeable than I am, but is actually wants to catalyze a movement and wants partners. Why? Because they feel the learning from watching and working with another culture, transcreating, making it local, will actually reverberate, and the whole thing will go
get better.
Yeah, and they believe this is a future, and they want to work with willing participants and try something different. And there's something to be said for, okay, let's go to the Netherlands, but that's another, if you will,
similar,
say, but to go to Saudi. I mean, you may, as I say, every country criticizes its sector, but the sector here does big projects and gets them done. I mean, and so, and at some scale, right? And you're harnessing all kinds of complexity, and so the sophistication is there. It's not the same kind of sophistication; it's different, but the industry has got some heft to it. So that's why we're interested. So it's coming to a major producing market. I don't know if that's helpful, but
that's actually really interesting. I mean, I didn't even ever think, because now that you mention it, construction is chaos, right? Like, I have a lot of friends who work in the construction businesses and stuff like that. I mean, there are extra people there. You don't need them. There's always like a lack of supply and demand. Yeah.
And everybody's having houses built. I was describing to Mark that a lot of it is buy land, construct on it, and then everybody's cement prices are going up. We can't get the labourers to work on time. So all those things do exist.
Well, one of the things that happens when you go into a talk mode is you start thinking about design itself.
Yeah.
So you get the architects involved. So you're building a kit of parts that are standardized. So an awful lot of construction is handicapped because of interest in non-standard functions. But actually, the world doesn't. Every culture has a standard alphabet, and you build all this complexity off, but not the built environment.
Yeah.
The building blocks are all non-standard, right? And it makes no sense. But this is a system that sort of lives with its own entropy, but it doesn't need to.
I have a couple of questions, and then I'll let you go. Firstly, this has been bothering me, so I have to ask: how do you two know each other? You've never been to Pakistan. So how do you...
but we know each other because we both work for an organization in London.
Is it MI6 or FBI, CIA? We bug him. There's an inside joke that this is.
And we were involved in communication activities for other governments.
So we did a lot of reputation management work. We did a lot of work around research, for example.
Okay.
We set up what we called a human terrain network of places where we could kind of at least get market research information for companies, etc., and for governments. And Mark and I we were both quite senior people in this organization, in this company. The company went belly up, but we went our own ways, as it were, and we've tried to connect on different things. During COVID we got together as well, and that didn't quite pan out. Mark has a few other interesting things under his belt as well. He's worked on areas around malaria, for example, looking at the dengue,
wow,
particularly, and also as you were the first chief marketing officer for
KPMG,
and so I learned a great deal from Mark.
Very diverse set of experiences.
But all the same common glue, which is creating channels between different entities, and usually the most interesting part for me has been business to business or business to government,
right?
Which is the consumer side is where all the money is, but it's also a high degree of specialization and automation. And for me, much more interesting areas are industrial.
And final question, then I'll let you go.
And
Pakistani.
before you do, you should also, I mean, one of the areas that Mark has been very involved with, which I think is of huge interest here, is the energy sector and natural gas production here in this country.
Definitely,
so I'd love to hear Mark's kind of understanding of what our natural gas capacity, how could that potentially help us develop as a nation in terms of our economic output?
Well, I mean, the world is running a narrative against hydrocarbons, very strong narrative, which lumps the bad hydrocarbons in with the good hydrocarbons, right? And so coal and natural gas are not the same thing, right, in any measure, but they're all put into the bad box. So nuclear is also in the bad box, right? So the only thing in the good box is hydro, which is sort of limited capacity, right? And wind and solar, which are in the good box without accounting for the actual environmental cost of building the wind and solar, right? So the bad box is of course still after 30 years of investment in non-hydro renewables, that's the way to think of it, non-hydro renewables, right? After 30 years of investment, those are only about 5% of our total energy consumption. So even though the capacity has gone up, total energy consumption has gone up, and your hydrocarbon sector is still 80% of our energy needs. Within the hydrocarbon sector, the coal story is still a huge story, right? We thought the coal story would end because that's sort of an industrial revolution story. In point of fact, coal is still a gigantic thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oil is for transportation, and we think the oil story is going to end because we're all going to go electric, but no one understands that if you were to go electric, what that means for the grids would have to more than double in size. I mean, more like triple in size. Natural gas is the cleanest of the hydrocarbons by a long shot. And natural gas is a primary feedstock for fertilizer, for many, many other products that we live on, right? And Pakistan is a producer, right?
So how do we tap into that as a nation?
Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet because many countries have lost their confidence to market their own resource. What has to happen is the sector has to get together and make the case and make a sensible investment case and make the case that the policies will be stable and that anyone who invests will not be disrupted by a change in government policy, right? So, you have, as I say, the prevailing narrative is anti all hydrocarbons. Makes no distinction. And so it's not favorable to find investments. So, but I believe for certain, you see what happened with the conflict with Russia, what a destabilizing factor that was, and that's not going away.
Yeah. It likely to increase, if anything, across the globe.
Exactly, and it's only because you got the Qataris who invented liquid transport, and that whole sector has basically saved our bacon, if you will. But to activate your resources to go to market with an investment regime and a policy regime that is you sort of ring fence and say it's going to be a stable investment climate. That's the way to attract investment, and there is money out there looking for these kinds of projects for sure. And there's also acute geological expertise looking for it that can't find a purchase in other markets. The U.S. is doing a lot to suppress its own ability to produce its own natural gas, right? And so you have this other cultures which have downgraded their ability. Mainland Europe is not developing natural gas. The UK is allowed it to go into decline for many years, right? So if you establish this reputation, not only do you have the gas, you have a policy regime, right? And you have a talent base here. So I mean, it's because you have the experience. So
We are the perfect storm of the best of everything.
yeah. So with the investment market, they know how to handle country risk. But they want to know that the policy risks are going to be stabilized. So this can be done.
Yeah.
I mean, this case can be made, and it wouldn't take a long time to see results, but it takes some organization. I'm a believer that, you know, we can talk about a transition, but we have to make. My motto is beware of scale. Hydrocarbons have the scale. You can't just wish them out.
Yeah.
The audience may take umbrage at what I've said, but when you look at the numbers, you can't replace the way people live with imaginary energy.
Pakistan is one of those countries, unlike the West, where we forget the luxury or taking umbrage at things like this. We don't have the luxury. We need things to happen. So even if it's not necessarily long-term, environmentally the best way, if it's a way that helps us to develop out of the situation we find ourselves in.
But concretely, you know, to be very practical, there are certain convening points, a small number of convening points globally. They're specialist conferences. I've never seen Pakistan present at these conferences. If Pakistan puts together a proposition and the right ministries go out, and there's some shoe leather you have to use here. You have to be able to see who are we dealing with. You can establish this message, and you can establish a regime that says we can be a trusted source for this, and you're producing and natural gas. There's many technologies now that will help even manage the carbon coming off natural gas. But I mean, it's intrinsically a much better source, of course, than oil or much better than coal, and has none of the other contaminants. And so could be a very bright future, but it has to just be organized.
Right.
Makes sense. I had last question.
Last
I got
question.
it here. Yeah. So I don't know. People like hearing this in Pakistan. So did you have Pakistani food and did you like it? It's silly, but people really find this interesting. So
I'm taking him for a curry later.
I have always loved,
because we love our food and we love that if you guys love our food. Yeah.
and we have wonderful Pakistani restaurants in Finland.
Oh, really?
We don't have the same ingredients. It's the thing that makes it special here.
course.
Is, it's a different kind of thing. But absolutely, I mean, I think it's part of the. It's an important part of the branding. I think food is a way of opening up, of transmitting a culture, creating a mood, and yes. So I absolutely.
So I made it my mission. I'm taking Mark to actually see Pakistan and get out of this arena. Actually see at least parts of Pakistan.
Take him to the mountains a bit, Munal or something. Yeah, that would be nice to see the sites a little bit at least.
I want to. Yeah. And you guys are welcome in Finland. We have to do a revenge match in Finland. Come up and do some interviewing in Finland.
Sure, we'd love that.
Yeah,
Yeah. I've never been. I'd love to go.
It's cold.
Yeah.
Well,
not always.
He swims in the ice. But yes, anyway.
But you guys go ahead, see the sites. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for watching. If you like our content, please do subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you for the next podcast.